Welcome to State of Mind, the show that's not afraid to explore the deepest depths of psychology and how it affects our daily lives. I'm Christine.
And I'm Joe, and on today's episode we will look into the development of fear and phobias and whether or not fears can actually be cured.
Coming up, we have special guest George Cunningham, who specialises in neuro-linguistic programming and has successfully cured many fears and phobias.
We'll also be reviewing your tweets, answering any questions that you may have, and we will see what knowledge our State of Mind psychologist Dr. John Pugh can shed on the topic.
And later on in the show, we'll be inviting Charlene, who has recently been cured by George Cunningham, and she will shed light onto how her life has now been changed. So, welcome to the show,
Welcome, George.
Thank you.
So, many people out there, myself included, are really curious as to what neuro-linguistic programming is. It's not something many people are familiar with. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Sure. NLP, I suppose, in a nutshell, is a model of excellence, where we study people who are excellent at what they do, work out how they do it, and teach that to other people. The standard definition in the books is that NLP is an attitude and a methodology that leaves behind a trail of techniques. The attitude is one of curiosity. How do people do that? The methodology is one of modelling, in other words, studying people who are excellent at what they do, which then we can create techniques from to teach other people to consistently get the same results.
That's really interesting. So, is it a fairly new practice?
NLP was created in the 70s by Richard Bandler and John Grinder in Santa Cruz University in California, and it's been developed over the years since then. I myself came to NLP in 1998 when I was on secondment down in Newbury, and my boss at the time, I was living up here in Liverpool, she gave me a practitioner course on tape and said, have a listen to these as you drive up and down in the car. Of course, I was using it from a business perspective then and started to adapt my communication and use a lot of techniques from NLP in a business context, which is very effective.
It's great to hear about the use of alternative methods for resolving problems such as phobias. Is NLP just restricted to phobias, or can clients come in with reasons like depression or addictions?
And NLP can be used for any form of communication or anything that another human being can do. Yes, we can use it for depression, we can use it for dealing with addictions, we can use it to get people, give people confidence, we can use it to change personal history, where you have an event in the past that you want to go back to and change how you feel about it. We can teach you how to do that with NLP. Of course, it can be used in a business context as well.
Does every phobia take the same amount of time to cure?
I think phobias vary in terms of how long they might take to deal with. Sometimes we can do it in 10 minutes or so. Sometimes it might take a couple of hours. It depends on the phobia itself. I like to test the phobia.
So, are there any phobias that you haven't been able to cure?
I suppose the one that I thought was going to be the most difficult was the very first phobia I came to deal with. And it was a chap in London on a course. He told me he was a bit scared of snakes. We went in and into the room in the back, and he saw a snake and was literally, boom, like a rat out of an aqueduct. I caught up with him about 50 yards later, and I thought he really does have a fear of snakes. He told me he'd been tagged twice by venomous snakes, had been in intensive care, so he had a big fear. It took me about 20 minutes, half an hour before he himself had the snake around his neck. It was an emotional release for him. He was at floods of tears with the joy that it brought him, actually, about being able to be around snakes and to handle them, which was important for him because he was from South Africa, where there's a few more snakes than there are in the UK.
Yeah.
Have you used NLP to stop your own phobias?
On the course in London with this guy who I thought was going to be difficult to deal with and actually turned out to be quite easy. He was supposed to work with me on my phobias. Now, at the time, I had a big fear of deep water. we just didn't, he was too delighted. He went off and phoned his wife and didn't work on me. So it was about 2 or 3 weeks later, I found myself at the Albert Dock, crossing the bridge between the Maritime Museum and the Tate with my kids, pointing out the jellyfish in the water, leaning right out over the water and pointing down to the very bottom of the dock gates, and suddenly realised that I had no fear at all. So unconsciously, my mind had dealt with whatever fears and phobia I had to allow me to do that, and I've never looked back.
Interesting, very interesting. Is there a limit to NLP? Has there been cases where you've been unsuccessful at solving a phobia?
I think in terms of is there a limit with NLP, it's best to look at if we can find somebody that can do something successfully, then we can codify it, work out exactly how they do it and teach that to other people. So in terms of the limits of NLP, if somebody can do it, we can teach it to somebody else, utilising the techniques of NLP.
Thank you very much for coming on the show. For more information on George, including how to contact him, please visit www.nlpliverpool.com.
Behind the scenes, we have Charlene, a previous client of George, who suffered heavily from a fear of spiders. Later, we will explore her recovery and put neuro-linguistic programming to the test.
Hello, I'm Alice from the social media section of State of Mind. Last week, we asked you to get in touch with us on Twitter to tell us some of your weird and wonderful phobias, and your response was incredible. We'd love to be able to show each and every one of them, but here are some of our highlights. David Jennings said that his greatest fear is spiders. Typical answer, he knows, but he also fears eyeballs and people touching their own eyeballs. Well, David, you're not alone there. That's me too. We've also heard from Kiefer, and his biggest fear is that he might not be the best for things that he's trying to do. And I'm sure he's not alone there either. Finally, we've heard from Martin Southwood, who has asked, how can I fix my fear of wasps and bees? Well, Martin, stay tuned because George will be answering that question very soon.
Now we're going to play a little game we like to call Phobia or Fiction. When I present a question or statement, I want each of you to tell me whether you think it's fact or fiction. And then once you give me your answers, we'll ask our expert, Dr. John Pugh. So please welcome Dr. John Pugh. So before we start, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, I'm a child and educational psychologist and also a psychotherapist, and have developed an interest over the years in supporting individuals who experience fears and anxieties.
So you sound like the perfect person to answer the questions. So we're going to start. First up, is every phobia actually a fear of death?
I say no, unless the person who has the phobia relates it to death.
Okay, and what would you think?
I would say no. I think I don't think it's a fear of death. It might be a fear of embarrassment or some other influence upon yourself.
Can you enlighten us?
I think our ego defence, our defence against our sense of self, elicits a really deep anxiety, and for us that can be really catastrophic. So you might theorise that as a fear of death.
It's very interesting. And our next one, are all fears irrational?
No, because all fears and phobias can affect someone badly, no matter how big or small, so they're all equally as important to deal with.
Okay.
Again, I think, no, not all fears are irrational. There are things out there that can kill you and you should be worried about them. But it's how it affects the individual.
Yeah.
I think.
So are we going along the right lines with that one, or?
Most certainly, fight or flight response is very adaptive and has supported our species throughout the ages. Not adaptive if we experience the same fear, for example, in a tutorial with our lecturer.
Yeah.
Then that wouldn't be adaptive, but yes, certainly, yeah, along the right lines.
As scary as tutorials can be.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So now I want you to tell me if this is fact or fiction. There are actually less than 400 recognised phobias.
I say less recognised that are actually sort of just put down on pen and paper, so they say it's down in the books, but I say there's much more than that that are yet to be established.
I would say there's definitely less than 400 actual real phobias. But again, it comes down to, you know, defining what is a phobia. A lot of people have anxieties and fears around things. It's not an actual phobia, though.
Yeah, 400 does seem to be quite a lot. But are we correct?
Yeah, I mean, to reiterate, there are innumerable ways in which individuals can develop fears, as far as fear is the agent, and there are numerous objects or reasons as to why they might experience fear. But as far as I know, there are, I think, less than 400 registered phobias, although theoretically they're innumerable.
Less than 20% of the population have a phobia. What do we think?
I'd say more. I'd say we're getting in a day and age now where people are coming out and it's been, in statistics-wise, saying they've got more and more people have got phobia problems, so I'd say more.
More than 20%?
I would say less than 20%, again, because when you look at an actual phobia itself, you know, somebody that actually has a phobia can hardly say the word itself of the thing that they're scared of. Most people's idea of a phobia is an anxiety and a fear around it rather than an actual phobia.
Yeah, so obviously a phobia is a very strong emotion that affects your life in a big way.
Yeah, many people have fears and anxieties, but debilitating phobias, 16%, 10 million people in the UK.
There are a lot of people who do suffer. So, are phobias infectious?
No, it comes from the person inside, I think.
They can be installed quite easily, and I've seen that happen. Actually, I was just about to tell you about a scene on one of Jamie Oliver's programmes, his search for his chef for his pub. There's a brilliant installation of a phobia into some kids at the end of that programme, and it's amazing to watch. It's not contagious. It's just the installation of the phobia.
Yes, if people if your parents have a strong fear of something, I suppose that easily rubs off on you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Are we barking up the right tree with that?
I think absolutely. You may be directly conditioned by a parent or a caregiver as a young child to irrationally fear, for example, insects. That's a very direct influence. Socially, you might be socialised as a young person and a young adult to defer unnecessarily to people in power, and thereafter develop a phobic response to people you consider to be an authority. And there's also a cultural context. So, for example, there are individuals in our society who have Islamophobia, fear a religious belief irrationally. So there are numerous ways in which you are influenced. I think it's probably overstated to say that it's infectious, akin to a medical health difficulty.
Yeah. Lastly, can a fear kill you?
Depending on the strength, but I think if when it comes to any sort of mental or psychological problem, if you let some come you, it will do. So I think yes.
I think in the words of Virginia Satir, people's biggest fear actually is a fear of change. So if we allow ourselves to be influenced by whatever that fear is and not change, then I suppose you could extrapolate that to mean, yes, it could kill you. But as I say, we help people change.
So like it adds on a new angle to fear itself in a way.
Yeah.
So as it sort of relates back to the first question of who you are and how you identify.
I mean, people will actually take their own lives to avoid change. So if you want to look at it that way, yes, fear can kill you, because people commit suicide to avoid change.
And I think, sorry to interrupt, it just shows you, if you don't get help and you do let it succumb you, it just answers the question in itself, like George stated.
Yeah. I think we're all in agreement with that one as well. Is that?
Yeah, I suppose in a long-term chronic stress predisposes you to the risk of illness, and there exists very good research to that effect. I suppose more exceptionally, there are people who, during a fight or flight response, the triggers in their body result in a cardiac arrest, which is absolutely exceptional, of course. So in a sense, you are correct, but that would be highly exceptional.
A very small amount of people that would happen to.
We needn't worry about that, I don't think.
Hopefully not.
That's all right, hopefully not, yeah.
Well, thank you very much. That's all we've got time for, I'm afraid,
Thank
on
you very much.
fact or phobia. But thank you very much to our guest, Dr. John Pugh.
Thank you, John.
So as we know, a phobia is a form of anxiety disorder in which a person suffers from a persistent fear of anything from small animals to interactions with other people. In most cases, phobias are nothing more than a mild inconvenience, but to some, they can be completely debilitating despite their irrational nature.
Encounters with a phobia can cause crippling anxiety, panic attacks, and can even leave people feeling powerless over their own lives. And as such, is no laughing matter. Well, that's until they become a laughing matter when you just realise how ridiculous they can be.
Take, for example, a lady by the name of Louise Arnold, who made headlines a few years back for her pulsophobia, also known as the fear of peas. She was quoted to have run out of restaurants at their mere sight and would completely avoid the frozen produce section in supermarkets.
And she's not alone. In fact, there have been many other recorded cases of people with incredibly strange phobias. Other examples include the ever popular omphalalobophobia, the fear of belly buttons,
And the fairly common metrophobia, the fear of poetry, and my personal favourite, anatidaephobia, the fear of being constantly watched by a duck. Yes, it is a real thing. As it turns out, almost anyone can develop a phobia about almost anything, even some of Hollywood's best and brightest. Everyone's favourite bad Santa, Billy Bob Thornton, had chromophobia, the fear of bright colours, as well as having phobias of both plastic cutlery and antique furniture.
Interstellar star Matthew McConaughey has autobitogoraphobia, meaning he may feel comfortable travelling through space and time, but he feels less comfortable simply travelling through a revolving door.
And last but not least, we have Johnny Depp. He is a man who is renowned for his extreme makeup and cartoonish characters, and yet has coulrophobia, a fear of clowns. It goes to show that no one is above a phobia.
Earlier, we discussed the possibility of curing fears as a reality. This is thanks to George Cunningham's method of neuro-linguistic programming. But how well does it work? And can you just trust it to last? We have former clients of Mr. Cunningham who's here to shed light from a personal perspective. Please welcome Charlene, everyone.
Welcome to the show, Charlene.
Hello.
So Charlene, you struggled with arachnophobia for a while now. Could you please tell the audience what it is and how you personally struggled with it?
It's the fear of spiders and just being in contact with spiders, whether it be holding them or having them behind glass up quite close. Just being petrified, really.
And I take it this affected you in everyday life, especially if they're like you just walking along in the street and then it just comes out of nowhere. Just sudden shock and surprise and...
Terrifying. If there's one crawling across my living room floor in the past, that's me jumping on furniture.
Yeah.
So that must have affected your family as well.
Yeah, I was known as a pain. Them having to literally call for them, like, to come and save me.
Even if they weren't in the house, or?
Oh, well then I'd be running to neighbours.
Really? Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, so has your experience with George helped to stop this then?
Very much so. I can now handle small spiders to touch and larger spiders so long as they're behind glass, which I couldn't do before.
Wow.
Sounds like you've come far since you've had George's help. But at the end of it all, do you feel that you're truly over arachnophobia? Do you feel like you've conquered the fear?
I see it as small baby steps, but I've come from quite a long way of being petrified to now I'm confident in myself that I will be fully cured one day.
Well,
Great.
I'm glad you've said that because we've got a little test for you now. We've got a tarantula behind the scenes. Now, this particular tarantula is a little bit aggressive, so we're going to keep him in the tank, but we're just going to see if you can handle the tank. Do you think you're ready for that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Best of
Let's
luck,
bring on the
Charlene.
challenge. So if you could
Yeah, of course.
pass him over.
Thank you, George.
There we go. Meet Jules. There you go.
Thank you.
Okay.
So how are you feeling whilst you've got hold of him?
Quite happy, really. He's like a cute, fluffy teddy bear.
So definitely completely different reaction than you had before.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I would never have got this close beforehand.
And are you okay with him moving? You can see him moving in there, his legs and...
Yeah, I think we've got a nice little relationship built up together.
Wow, that's brilliant.
You've certainly done yourself proud, Charlene. Well, guys, thank you for coming on the show. We've enjoyed having you.
Thank you very much.
Been great.
Thanks.
Well, that's all we've got time for on today's show.
Next week's topic is dream analysis, where we look into what it means when you dream.
Do you have an interesting dream that you want us to know about? Message us on Twitter with the hashtag StateOfMindDream.
And don't forget to tune in to next week's State of Mind.